As I said, my name is Lyman. I'm a graduate math student here at Western. And so the reason I actually joined the math program here at Western is I actually eventually want to go into online dating and kind of figure out the algorithms that make that work. So I'm here today to talk to you about how dating and love can be modeled using math. So dating can be a mess, right? I mean, there's so many questions like, have I found the right person? Like, what do I text? When do I text? What do I wear? What does that text mean? Does he like me? Like, who knows? It's just chaos, right? It's utter chaos. But we do not go into this battle unarmed, because we have math. All right, so today I'm going to talk to you about a couple different, I'm going to be focusing mostly on modeling and how we can use math to model some of the issues that we encounter in dating. And so one question that maybe many of you have had is when to know when you found the one, the right person, whether to settle down and commit. So we're going to use some probabilities and statistics to try and figure that out. So because this is math, we do need to first kind of set the situation and label some variables. So we're going to let I be the ith person you'll meet in your dating life. So for the sake of this discussion, let's say maybe you start dating when you're 15, and you maybe want to be done when you're 40. N is the total. Maybe ideally, I don't know. All right, N is the total number of potential partners you'll meet in that time period. R is the current person you're meeting. This means that you've already rejected the first R minus 1 people. And lastly, P is the probability that you're settling down with the best person. So P is eventually what we want to figure out, and then eventually also maximize. All right, so this could be a really complicated situation by itself, so we're going to add some additional assumptions to kind of make this easier for us to figure out. So the first one, you can only choose one person in this situation. You can't be married to multiple people. There also exists a strict total order. And so, as I say here, what that basically means is that everyone can be ranked unambiguously. So if I've met Sue and I met Jane, I know that I prefer Sue over Jane. And that just kind of reduce some of that ambiguity of deciding I like them equally, I wish I could date them both. But that's obviously, again, not an option. At least for most people, I guess. Anyways, we also are going to assume that you, as the decider, knows the ranking of everyone that you've met so far. But you have no idea if Princess Perfect is just around the corner or not. All right? So you know everyone that you've met, but you have no idea about who you might meet in the future. Also, to reduce ambiguity, we're going to assume people are meeting sequentially with no overlap and randomly. So you could meet your perfect person tomorrow, or you could meet them at age 40, like I said. And lastly, every decision is irrevocable. So you meet someone great, and you're not sure yet, you can't sleep around and go back later and say, hey Jane, I'm so sorry, you're so great. There's no turning back. Decisions are irrevocable. So at first, if we were to choose randomly, not be smart about it, and not use math, the probability that we end up with the best person should be pretty obvious, but just 1 over n, right? So just picking someone at random. So obviously that's pretty terrible. It is abysmal. Especially because you think about it, if you meet more people, like in today's online dating where you're potentially being exposed to thousands and thousands of people, essentially your chances go to 0. However, like I said, we have math on our side, so we're not going to use it randomly. Okay, so instead of thinking of probability as a function of I, let's instead think of it as a function of R, like the number of people you've rejected so far. So like I said, this is the one source of information that we can use to improve our dating chances, essentially. So at first, the probability that we end up with the best person is this intersection here, right? The probability that we both select a person and they're the best. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. You'll learn some of these tricks if you do take probability here at Western, but this does allow us to rewrite the equation this way as a conditional probability. So the probability that the person we selected, the probability that we select a person and they're the best, given that they're the best. As I said earlier, the probability that the person's the best is 1 over n. Also, the chance that we select someone that we've already rejected is 0. Like I said, there's no turning back. So this does allow us to start our summation at R. So the question now is, how do we select someone? So what I'm proposing is we're going to create a stopping rule. And so a stopping rule is basically saying at some point we have to decide, all right, I've kind of played the field a little bit, and I think I have an idea of what I want out of a potential partner. So this allows us to rewrite this equation now this way. So the probability that we've met the second best person in the first, of the I people we've met so far, the second best person is that first chunk that you rejected, R minus 1. So basically what this is saying is that you will commit to a person if they're the best person you've met so far after your stopping point. And eventually you're going to figure out what the optimal stopping point is. So anyways, just the chance that you run into a person is just a pretty easy fraction. So we do get the summation of R minus 1 over I minus 1, so that's this probability here, times, again, still just 1 over n. Because our summation doesn't rely on R or n, we can pull that out of the fraction. So that's a little complicated. I'll be happy to go over that in more detail at the end of the talk if people are interested. We're going to move forward from now. But let's think about a simple example on how this might affect our actual dating chances. So let's just suppose n is 20, so you're going to meet 20 people in your life, and you decide up front that you're going to turn down the first 3. So the 4 is when you start your potential meeting someone period. So this gives us about 0.38 or 38.2%. Sorry, 38.42% chance of selecting Prince Charming, Princess Perfect. Whoever that might be for you. And that's compared to, again, 1 over 20, which is only a 5% chance. So, not so abysmal, a little better. All right, so we can actually improve this situation further. So like I said, okay, so this is a little math dense. If you haven't taken calculus, don't worry. But essentially what we're going to do, though, is change this into, instead of a discrete case, so meeting person 1, meeting person 2, meeting person 3, into a continuous case. We're going to think of our dating lives. And what percent of our dating lives should we stop to optimize our chance of finding that perfect person. So essentially I reorganize our summation into what's known as a Riemann approximation of an integral. And that's what this is over here. We also get our bounds of integration. So as we take this limit as the number of people we meet goes to infinity, essentially, we get this integral. Solving this integral gives us that. We then are able to optimize that. And essentially what we get is that we should stop when we've met about 0.36, at 36.8% of the people we'll ever meet. Okay, that makes sense? So what's also kind of interesting in the case of symmetry here is that your chance of actually meeting the best person, assuming you stop at that point, is also 36.8%. So let's kind of rephrase that again. This tells us that we maximize our chances of ending up with the best person with a probability of 36.8% if we reject the first 36.8% of people we meet. This also does apply still in the discrete case. We just have to rearrange and solve for R. But if you think about it, if you want to date for 30 years, essentially you should turn down the people you meet in the first 10 years no matter what, and that'll maximize your chances of finding that perfect person. So yeah, so basically look, if you're having that defining the relationship conversation, just say hey, I'm sorry, I have not yet reached my optimal stopping period. Right? Actually don't say that, that would probably not go well. But anyway, so what does this tell us? What you might have noticed is that this is a kind of unbalanced situation. So we do have this optimum point, but if you miss this optimal point, making the mistake too soon or too later has very different ramifications. So if we, for example, wait until the 50th percentile, there's a good chance we'll meet that perfect person in that first 50% of our dating life. And if you really wait until we find someone better, well, you won't until it reach 40, and everyone will suck. Right? But on the other end of the spectrum, though, if you decide to stop your dating period earlier, there's a chance you might meet maybe your 3rd favorite person, or your 4th, or your 5th. And that would mean that you'd end up with your 2nd favorite person. In fact, we're not going to go through the math, but it's pretty interesting that if you lower your thresholds to even just 5%, so if you want to find someone in the top 5% of your potential matches, you should ideally reject the first 22%. You'll actually have a 57% chance of finding someone in that top 5%. Again, that was compared to 36.8% earlier, so that was only about a third. Now we're over half. Okay? Does that make sense? So that's kind of the climax of this model here. Does anyone have any questions on this? Yeah. Yeah,
so you said reject the first 36%, right? What were the odds then that we ended up with the best person?
So also 36.8%.
Oh, okay.
Is, 1 over E. Yeah. So, yeah, kind of example is if you start dating when you're 15, the first 10 or so years, you should just, again, have that conversation I've not yet reached my optimal dating period. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. So this is called the Gale-Shapley matching algorithm. And this is actually one of my favorites. It kind of has a good message at the end. Deciding whether to ask a person for his or her phone number, you can probably guess where we're going to go with this. But similar to last time, we got to kind of set up the situation. And those of you that may like math a little less, don't worry. This is going to be more game theoretic and less probability. So we'll talk about that more in just a second. So we're going to first assume there are two populations, one of which is pursuing the other. So this works for any sort of pair of populations. I'm going to talk about this example in the future, but it also works for like schools trying to match students, dog owners trying to match with dogs, you name it. However, for simplicity, I'm a guy, I'm personally seeking women, so let's just assume, for the sake of this conversation, that I'm operating under that perspective, that men are pursuing women. We're also going to assume that the two populations are of equal size, so if there's 20 guys, there's 20 girls. And that each individual has ranked the members of the other population in order of personal preference. So similar to the last situation, we need to really use that strict total order to guarantee that there's no ambiguity in the decision. Okay, so this is how this algorithm works. So each man, or again, any member of a pursuing population, asks on a date the woman he most prefers that has not already said no to him. So multiple men, for example, could ask the same woman. For example, Katy Perry's in the group. I'm sure a lot of guys would ask her, right? At least I would. Anyways, step 2. So this is a little more complicated. So raise your hand if you have a question. But each woman then either continues to date the man she's been dating. She's already said yes to one in a previous round, so she can stay where she's at. Or if she's been asked on a date by someone she prefers over her current partner, she can say yes to him and no to everyone else who asks. So basically, each woman can trade up if the opportunity presents itself. And men can also ask even if someone is theoretically in a relationship. Take that as you will. Yeah. All right. And then, so we keep on going until everyone's in a relationship. And so one of the great things about this algorithm is that it is guaranteed to terminate. There's, again, a set number of people that you start with at the beginning. If you think about it, as each man kind of goes down his list, eventually every woman has to get asked at least once, and the way this algorithm works is that she'll say yes until something better comes along. All right, so as I said, the result is everyone gets married. Obviously, again, these are models. We do have to make assumptions in math to model, otherwise it really makes it more difficult to model these complex situations. So there are modifications of this algorithm. If you're interested in this, I can direct you to articles you can read that have modifications that do take into account a woman's decision to say no, or a man's decision to not try, or whatever it might be. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask if the guy would ask every single girl.
So the way that the initial algorithm was designed is that yes, he starts at the top of the list and he goes down until someone says yes and stays with him.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyways, what's kind of interesting about the algorithm though is that these marriages are stable. And so, but that's kind of a vague term, right? What do we mean by stable? It kind of sounds like maybe some of those marriages maybe aren't so great, right? But it's stable in two senses of the word. In two senses of the word. And these are, again, game theory ideas. But these marriages are first Pareto optimal, and they're also a Nash equilibrium. So we'll go in those in a second. How much time I got? I'm on track. Great. So we're going to do a slight detour. Okay. So who here is familiar with the prisoner's dilemma? Cool. Most everyone. Great. So I'm just going to do a quick summary then. But in that situation, you have two people that have committed a crime together, right? And they have been arrested, but maybe there's not enough evidence to really arrest them, or sorry, put them in jail for as long as the police would like. So we'll say person 1, person 2. So in this situation, each prisoner has a choice to kind of stay quiet. I'm going to call that cooperating, or it's I'm going to abbreviate here, co-op. Or he can rat out his friend, right? So who wants to tell me what would be the best situation for an individual?
Snitch.
Snitch. What happens if your partner also snitches? Then you're both kind of in trouble, right?
Oh, you guys both got it.
You want to both cooperate.
So what's best for the group is they both cooperate, right? But what's best for an individual is that you're selfish and your buddy's a nice guy and you take advantage of that, right? So I'm going to put numbers here. These represent the number of years in jail. Okay. So again, like I said, like if you rat the other person out, for example, the other person stays quiet, all the blame goes on the other person, essentially, right? If you both rat each other out, the police have more evidence against you, and so you can both go to jail for a longer period of time. If you're both quiet, they might have caught you on something, but not enough to really put you in prison for the full 6 years. All right, so now I'm going to tell you what these two things mean. We're going to figure out which of these situations corresponds to which of those concepts. So let's start with the Nash equilibrium. What a Nash equilibrium is when every player in the game, so in this case there's essentially 2 players, cannot benefit by changing only their own strategy. Does that make sense? So here, one of the players would benefit by changing their strategy from cooperating to competing because it means he has less time in prison, but it would hurt his buddy. Same here, the other person would benefit from then ratting out because his years go from 9 to 6, so he's still in prison, but not as long. So in fact, this is the Nash equilibrium, because the only position from which neither player can move without improving their situation. Yes?
Can a game have more than one equilibrium?
It absolutely can. This one does not. This particular game only has one Nash equilibrium, but more complex games frequently have multiple. All right, a Pareto optimal situation is one in which no player can move without hurting someone else. So it's kind of an opposite concept. So someone want to take a guess maybe what the Pareto optimal situation is? Yeah, both players cooperate. So this is Pareto optimal. So you think about here, if one of the players moved, it could hurt the 0 person go to 6. So this is not Pareto optimal. Same here. This is not Pareto optimal because if both players change, we can move up to here. So Nash equilibrium really views the game at the personal level, while Pareto optimal views the game at the group level. So like I said, this situation is kind of unique, and what we're talking about is that it is both. It is both Pareto optimal and it's a Nash equilibrium. Also, to kind of elaborate on what Dan was saying, a game can only have one Pareto optimal situation. It can't have multiple Nash equilibrium. Cool. But the reason I bring this up, so some of you may have heard of a Nash equilibrium before. Oh man, I'm going to say it wrong. John Nash. I would say Steve Nash. So as I said, a Nash equilibrium is a situation in a non-cooperative game where each player knows the strategies of his opponents and has nothing to gain by changing only his own personal strategy. So John Nash was a famous guy. He did a lot of contributions to game theory. In fact, they actually made a movie about him, which many of you may have seen. A Beautiful Mind. John Nash suffered from schizophrenia, but was a very talented mathematician. Anyways, they actually kind of make a big deal about the Nash equilibrium in this movie. For those of you who've seen it, there's this scene when they're in a bar, and Nash and his buddies all want to hit on this one person, and none of her friends. Well, luckily, used math to help out and optimize his dating experience. And what he said to his friends is like, hey, if we all go after the same person, we're going to sabotage each other, and none of their friends are going to want to go on a date with us because no one wants to be second choice. So instead of all vying for the same person being selfish, let's instead go for our second or third choices and have a better chance of actually ending up with someone we like. But again, this idea that just because it's stable, just because it's equilibrium, does not mean it's an optimal situation. For example, in our algorithm that we've been talking about, like I said, these men go down the list, and also women can be trading up. But at any given time, there could be a lot of other people that each person prefers. However, like I said, they're stable in that no 2 people in separate relationships would leave their current partners to be with each other. So even though Bob may prefer Sue over Jane, Sue prefers Ed over him, right? And so it's this kind of strict order again that we've been talking about. So this is kind of an interesting consequence. So men, like I said, start at the top of the list and go down. So they end up with the partner best available to them. Women, on the other hand, in this situation, will end up with the least bad of all the men who ask them on a date. So if only the really undesirable guys at the kind of the bottom of the totem pole ask, the algorithm would say that they would still eventually say yes to one because they'd rather be with a bad person than a no person. So like I said, obviously this is a very simplified situation, and it's just an attempt to kind of model, but we always have to make these assumptions to make these models. But basically the point is, should you ask that person for his or her phone number? Absolutely yes. Yeah, go for it. Like right now, like turn to your right and say, hey, like let's go on a date. Yeah. But the point is that the pursuing population always has the benefit. By putting yourself out there, you will better your chances of ending up with someone that you're happier with. Cool. Any questions on the Gale-Shapley matching algorithm? Yeah?
Wait, so is this assuming that each person has a desirability regardless of their partner? So like, if like Sam is like really good with Sue, he'd also be really good with like...
So this algorithm does not, but there are variations of this algorithm that do take that into account.
Okay, but so it's assuming that like Sam's like desirability is the same for every single person.
No, so it's each person has their own, and they're statistically independent, I guess I'd say.
Okay.
That just because someone is my first choice does not increase the chances that anyone else, that same person is someone else's first choice.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Does it change the outcome of the algorithm if you do assume there's some correlation between the
Yeah, and
ranking
it actually
vectors?
unfortunately makes the chances worse for most people. Because everyone goes to the same person at the top, and then the people at the bottom have to wait until really like the dregs come by. So, but obviously it's not realistic either, right? Like we all have our personal preferences. I will say that I'm like kind of like a hopeless romantic, so I don't believe in this really that much. But anyways, so we've done a lot of math, and it's kind of I recognize that they're models, right? They don't sometimes replicate what's actually happening. So I do want to take kind of a small math break and like help have a brief conversation on what we can do to kind of maximize our current online dating situations. All right, so here's some basic online dating tips, and maybe some of you guys have seen these before, but unsurprising, top of the list is photos. For those of you that used Tinder before, I'm sure you do so much reading on it, right? But no, usually, as the statistic says, people report that when deciding on whether to reach out or match with someone, 90% of the time the reason is the other person's pictures. That's probably pretty unsurprising. So here's a few tips on pictures. This is just research done. As I said, this research, I have a list at the end, a list of books or recommended reading at the end of this presentation if this stuff interests you, but I do try and cite where I do get stuff. So this data is from a book called Dataclysm. It's written by the guy that actually founded OkCupid. So yeah, anyways, I do recommend for men that you look away from the camera and you don't smile, preferably with an animal while doing something interesting. So I guess like the ideal male picture is like to have the like contemplative look holding a golden retriever while skydiving. What's interesting though is that women is almost the opposite. They recommend that women look towards the camera with a picture taken from a high angle, so like up here, and with either a shy or flirty look, and actually no animals or alcohol. That decreases the chance that someone will reach out or swipe yes on you. Take that as you will. Also, description. So, like I said, usually photos are considered to be the most important thing, but I mean, after you look at the photos and you actually match, you have to figure out what to say, right? And please don't just say, hey. So they do recommend for descriptions, so as I say here, the top 10% of profiles have descriptions that are on average 35% longer than the bottom 90%. And the idea is that gives you space to have a hook and be unique. The more things that you have that are make you different than everyone else gives the other person more opportunities to like initiate a conversation. So if you just say, I like adventure, they're obviously going to ask, what adventures do you go on? But if you say, oh, I learned French and 3 years ago, it's like, oh, where did you learn it? Right? Having something that can initiate some sort of connection. So, do spend some time on that at least. Don't just take selfies all day, I guess. Right? All right, so once you do establish some messaging, here's some tips on that. The highest response rates are to those messages that are between 40 and 60 characters in length, so not too long. Don't write an essay. They reference some joke, either on the person's profile or in past conversations, so if you can establish some sort of inside joke or camaraderie. Using proper grammar is huge. Actually, one of the biggest things that decrease your chances is if you use acronyms or like text shortcuts and stuff. So don't say lol or BRB or all that stuff. Also, don't overthink it. Those messages, messages with the highest response were those that took less than 2 minutes to compose. Frequently, if you overthink it, won't go well. All right, so those are some kind of basic online dating tips. But other than that, there's not a whole lot we can use math for when it comes to dating. It's pretty much just give it the best shot you have. The one exception to that, though, one website that I'm a big fan of is OkCupid. And OkCupid has this really intensive algorithm and questionnaire that really helps you, in theory, gives you the most flexibility of determining like what the algorithm presents you with. You have a lot of control over who is shown to you or who is suggested to you. So the questionnaire is kind of complicated, so we're going to go through it piece by piece. The first thing that you get to do when you're going through these questions is choose whether to answer a question or not. So you don't actually have to answer every question. You can just pass or skip. If you do choose to answer a question, though, you have to select an answer. Keep in mind that some of these questions have sometimes more than one answer. The third part is you select which answers would be acceptable in a partner. And keep in mind that there can be multiple acceptable answers, just not all of them can be acceptable. For example, if there's 3 questions, you can make 2 of them acceptable in a partner, and the third one unacceptable. If you make them all acceptable, the algorithm can't use that information, and so it just throws that question away and treats it like you didn't answer it. So it's kind of a waste of your time. And then lastly, assigning an importance to each question. So you have 1 of 4 choices, and they each have these many points. So if a question is mandatory that the person answer correctly or acceptably, it's 250 points. Very important is 50. Somewhat important is 10, and a little important is 1. So clearly, right, the algorithm very heavily weights those questions that are mandatory. So basically what that tries to enforce is that, like, for example, if you are looking for a potential partner and it's mandatory that they like dogs, this will basically weed out everyone that doesn't like dogs, right? All right, so this is how it works. So first of all, the compatibility is only based on questions that you both answered. And the reason they do that, obviously, is because the algorithm needs to know which answers are acceptable for the other person, right? Then from there, match percentage is calculated as a fraction with the total number of points that you've kind of given out on the bottom, and then the total number of points or questions they've answered correctly is the number of points on top. So you'll notice, though, that that gives you different match percentages for each person. So Riley might be really compatible with me, but I just don't like Riley or something, right? So what it does to kind of even that out is to create a geometric mean of the two. And so if one is much lower than the other, that pulls that average down. So what does that mean for us? What can we do? The easiest thing is to just answer a lot of questions. There are hundreds of questions on OkCupid. And so if someone you're interested in has only answered 20 questions, there's maybe a good chance that you haven't answered those 20, and the fraction will be 0, even if you could potentially be a great match. Also, you kind of basically want to answer all of the fluff questions, because all it does is bump up your score. So in particular, answering questions with multiple acceptable answers. So like I said, you can mark more than one's acceptable. You can't just mark them all as acceptable. So like I said, a lot of things have like 4 or 5 answers. If you mark 4 of them right, there's a very good chance that the person will say something that is okay with you, and they'll get a bunch of points. And also, if you like weight all these kind of fluff questions as very important, that kind of gives potential partners a lot of points that increase the chance that they'll like match with you. Also, if you're just trying to meet as many people as possible, then you want to avoid questions with few answers or which are divisive, because there's a good chance the person or you will answer their question like unacceptably, and that will lower that fraction, right? Any questions on the OkCupid questionnaire? Yeah?
Do you know how they decided the cutoff for the point distribution? For like the 250, 50?
Yeah, I do not actually know. I do know they did some research that, kind of unsurprisingly, there are questions that just don't matter, right? And there are questions that are very, very important to people. Like some people care, like you want kids, right? So people rate that really important. It's like mandatory. So they did want to create this like skewed weighting system to make sure that those questions kind of rose to the top, essentially. All right. So if you're interested in optimizing your OkCupid experience, there is a book I recommend called Optimal Cupid. It's written by a guy called Christopher McKinley. He is an applied mathematician at UCLA. He actually was on Wired magazine a couple years ago for essentially hacking the OkCupid algorithm. He created like 12 fake profiles and figured out the ideal questions to answer and how to answer them and stuff. But essentially, his takeaway is what we have just said here, that the more questions you answer and the more like kind of fluff you can answer, even if you aren't, if you're not a great match for someone else, if you're essentially telling the algorithm that everyone is a great match for you, that geometric mean will be raised, right? Anyway, so he also did a lot more, and so the kind of last thing I want to talk about is this math technique that he used to figure out this kind of optimal dating experience in OkCupid. And it's actually one that, if any of you do want to go into online dating, which I think would be super cool, and I'd love to talk to you about it, but it's a technique used in modern dating algorithms. So it's called K-means clustering. So this is a machine learning technique, and so machine learning means that it's a technique that's used in computer algorithms that allows those programs to adapt or change as they get more information. And so a simple example of a program or algorithm that uses machine learning techniques is like Netflix's movie recommendation. So the more movies that you watch on Netflix, the program adapts and learns what movies to better recommend to you. And so a lot of dating algorithms use a very similar mechanic to try and improve the dates they recommend for you. So how this particular math technique works, as again, it's called K-means clustering, is you have this whole bunch of data. So you can view each of these points maybe like as people in this situation, or as potential dates. And so we kind of pick randomly a representative for a cluster. So one of the biggest things we want to do in online dating is to change essentially continuous data into categorical data. So people can vary across all sorts of dimensions: height, age, education, income, interests, hobbies, etc. But eventually we need to draw a line, right? We eventually need to say, these are the people we would consider dating, these are the ones we won't. So that's kind of the purpose of this algorithm, is to cluster people together and to, again, change continuous data into categorical data. So once we've picked particular data points that are made representative of a potential cluster, we group all the data points near that representative and label that as one cluster. Then from there we find what's called the centroid, or basically just the middle of each cluster, and label that as a new representative, and then redraw those lines. So what happens is that centroid keeps on shifting, but over time, if the algorithm is done correctly, it should converge. And then that is considered to be like the ideal representative of that cluster. And so if you think about it, like, it's actually interesting, is we essentially do this in our day-to-day lives without realizing it. We might start when we're 15, and you think, oh my gosh, like Taylor Swift is so awesome. Then you realize, like, wait, like 5 years later, Katy Perry is so much better. Right? And that's because as you gather information, those lines shift, like those thresholds that you've drawn for yourself. And so these computer algorithms are trying to kind of model that process that we do ourselves. So any questions on K-means clustering or OkCupid? Awesome. So that's actually pretty much all I had for you today. As I promised, here's a recommended list of books. They all kind of do relate to online dating, math, and their connections and stuff, and I do highly recommend all of them. Very interesting stuff. So with that, any final questions? Yeah.
Do you think you're just at like a serious disadvantage in this day and age? If you don't do online dating, do you think online dating is just like really a good idea to do that?
So I will say, like, clearly, even just 100 years ago, people were far more likely to date someone in their community or their neighborhood or a local area. And definitely, we have far more of an online presence now, and our networks are far wider than they used to be. If you choose not to online date, you're definitely cutting out a large portion of the population. That being said, despite the changes that online dating has had in modern romance, the still best indicator of future relationship success is proximity. There's a lot of research that shows that, more so than socioeconomic status, education, ethnicity, you name it. If you usually end up with the people that you are near, right? I mean, that's even true even with online dating, right? If you swipe yes on someone on Tinder that lives in Canada, I've done that a couple times, and the response rates have not been good. So we usually end up with people that are nearby. And so that's never going to change. So I don't think you're completely shutting yourself in the foot, but I think it opens up your options a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
On this first method you went over, the optimal stopping point.
Yeah.
Does the model change at all if you sort of assume that all the people that you've ranked are also going by the same method. And so not if you wait too long, not only will maybe you already passed over your optimal person, but if they're still there, they'll hit their optimal stopping point and then be unavailable. Does this model change if you sort of assume everyone is following the same method?
I guess if people are like starting at different ages, it would, right? But if you are dating people approximately your age, theoretically you should all be stopping at about the same time. But I would have to imagine there's some complicated probability in there that you'd have to spend a lot of time thinking about to figure that out. Yeah. Yeah?
So I read this book called The Paradox of Choice, and it's about how increasing the amount of options like always decreases like how much you enjoy whatever you pick. Do you think it's still
really
a
frustrating,
good idea?
Yeah.
Do you think it's still a good idea to like even like give yourself the option of online dating, because then you're kind of like a cat chasing?
Yeah,
like,
so a lot of like current dating advice books will tell you like if you do choose to do online dating, that you're right, that like it's really hard to consider going on a second date when you have another 5 dates lined up. Like, oh, he coughed one too many times, out the window, right? So most like psychologists would recommend that to recognize that basically, and to kind of be tolerant, right?
Okay.
So go on second dates, go on third dates, give the person a chance. Don't be too quick to discount those options or possibilities. But yeah, it's a fine line for sure. Yeah.
So another thing with the threshold algorithm is it seemed like the way it was phrasing is just like you reject or whatever, but it seems like it's important to have, instead of just like 5 like 2-month-long relationships or whatever, it would be better to like there should be more weight towards like a 2-year relationship, right? So
yeah, so it assumes that you'll, again, it goes back to that ranking, right? That you will know immediately, essentially, where they are in your personal ranking. And it really doesn't take into account any sense of like discovery of the other person.
Okay.
And psychologists will tell you that yes, you should go and have a couple longer relationships before. Like, don't just like have a bunch of one-night stands and then get married, right? Practice living with someone, right?
Has anyone looked at that from an information theory point of view, like the noise in your ranking
I
vector?
am not sure, actually, to be honest, but that would be interesting. I'll look that up with you. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming, guys. Really appreciate it.